last episode was about penises in art, and you might expect this episode to be about vaginas. But vaginas aren't a big focus in art, and they don't vary much in the Western tradition. They are almost always entirely hairless, and to the extent that they're visible, they resemble a doll's genitalia. Also, they are generally at least partially covered, either by an artfully placed hand or by a cloth that's holding itself up magically in midair, in short, by something. There are many, many examples of this tradition, but to illustrate this point, I will show you three. The first is a Roman copy of the very first statue of a nude female in the Western tradition, a 4th century BC statue generally called the Cnidian Aphrodite. This version is generally considered the closest to the original, which no longer exists. The first fully nude female started the tradition of nude females concealing their genitalia. I will show you two Titian Venuses as well to show that the tradition continued. The Venus of Urbino is also holding her hand over her genitalia, though many think that she may be stimulating herself, which is an unusual variation on the theme. The Venus with the lute player's genitals, instead, are concealed by an unexplained piece of cloth, or perhaps gauze, that she is holding against her thigh, but somehow hangs down straight from the thigh over her genitals. There are a few exceptions, such as Gustave Courbet's L'origine du monde, the origin of the world, but we are so used to the tradition of concealed, hairless female genitalia that Courbet's painting still shocks viewers today, 150 years after it was made, by its frank realism. Anyway, there's not much to say about vaginas in art, so this episode will focus on breasts, which are much more interesting. Above all, breasts vary from period to period, and thereby reveal a great deal about the period's views of beauty, femininity, and so forth. Some female nudes seem to have been modeled on nude males, with female breasts added onto a male torso. Michelangelo's statue of Night from the Medici family tomb in Florence could be an example. Night does not have the wide hips and narrow waist that are typical of women. In fact, one could claim that this is typical of Michelangelo and might reflect a lack of interest in female bodies. There is, however, something about Night that is more typical of female nudes of her period. Her breasts are unrealistically far apart. The Titian Venuses we looked at too, although they are much closer to anatomical probability, display a lot of sternum between the breasts. And there are many examples as extreme as Michelangelo. In Lucas Cranach the Elder's The Choice of Paris, the three goddesses, who are so similar that Paris must be having a very difficult time with his choice, have breasts so far apart that they are just under the armpits. Indeed, judged by the standard of nature, they are a strange-looking group of goddesses. Aside from their odd breast location, their hairlines are so high one would think that they were balding, and they each have a pouty little belly that seems to imply that they are in the early to mid-phase of pregnancy. So what's it all about? Well, the simple version is this. Like the depiction of penises, the depiction of breasts follows the body ideals of its culture. There is, however, a bit of difference. The depiction of penises is unrelated to fashion in clothing. It is more directly related to ideals of masculinity. The depiction of breasts, on the other hand, is directly related to fashion. To make this clear, we need only compare Cranach's nude goddesses to a clothed Renaissance woman. I will use the example of this portrait of a betrothed couple at a window, attributed to Filippo Lippi. Aside from her astonishingly rich clothing and jewelry, the woman has several things in common with Cranach's goddesses. Her forehead is very high, because in the Renaissance high foreheads were fashionable, both for men and women. It is of course often easy for a man to achieve that look, because men are often balding, but women had to pluck and or shave their hairlines backwards, and without modern razors. The Renaissance's taste in torsos was also unisex. They liked an upper body shaped roughly like that of a man in armor. Again, this was easier for men to achieve. Women achieved it by binding their breasts tightly and apparently squashing them out to the sides. This is what led to the vision of women's breasts that we saw above. Lippi's woman also shares the goddess's pouty belly. In her case, this consists of a wad of cloth
hanging off her corset like a late 19th century bustle, only in the front. The point was not to show that she was pregnant, not what you would want in a fiancée after all, but rather to suggest that she had one of a fiancée's principal attractions, fertility. The point, then, is that the goddesses' bodies reflect contemporary fashion. They have the body a man might imagine if he had only seen clothed women. What is interesting is that Renaissance artists, unlike ancient sculptors, had nude models. But the idea that fashion instilled in them of women's bodies was stronger than the evidence of their eyes. Michelangelo and Titian were very influential on the Western tradition. Indeed, there is a long series of female nudes, such as Manet's Olympia, that are more or less responses to Titian's Venus of Urbino. Manet's Venus is much more clearly a sex worker than Titian's, and he is clearly intentionally modifying or answering Titian on many points. The Venus of Urbino's inviting, genital-covering hand becomes in Manet's vision a hand clasped firmly over the woman's genitals, just as Titian's sleeping dog becomes a hissing cat. But he has also changed Venus's breasts to something more plausibly naturalistic, probably without realizing that he was showing you a change in style. Most breasts in portrait are not, in any case, plausibly naturalistic. In 17th and 18th century painting, breasts moved to the center of the chest and up, again clearly following the fashion in underclothes. An example of the style in underclothing is the woman on the left in this Terborch painting called Curiosity. This woman's breasts, unlike those of the previous century, are just below shoulder height. Also, there are several inches of flesh between her armpits and her breasts, and almost no space between them, though cleavage is clearly indicated. To see a nude whose breasts follow this fashion, we turn to Boucher's Vénus à la toilette, Venus at her makeup table. This goddess's breasts are just below shoulder height, creating a remarkably elongated rib cage. We can't see the space between her armpits and her breasts because of the position of her right arm, but her breasts are almost right next to each other, exactly as if she were wearing the corset that held the Terborch woman's breasts up high and together, except that she is nude. 20th and 21st century art can not generally be interpreted this way because it is not, on the whole, so concerned with fashion. The link between nudes and fashion is also not so clear in the 19th century, but certainly fashion in breasts changed. William Merritt Chase's Portrait of a Lady in Black is a great example. The elegant S-curve of this woman's body is clearly the result of corseting, but her breasts are not, or do not seem, to be like those of the 17th or 18th century women's. They are quite high up the chest, but there is a big difference. Rather than two plump breasts offered up to the view, this woman has an entirely covered unibosom, substantial but indistinct. So the fashion in breasts had clearly changed in several ways.
In short, fashion in breasts changes a lot. The preferred breasts can be high or low, far apart or close together, distinct or merged, small or large. And generally, the breasts in the art museum reflect the period's fashions far more than any naked breasts the artist might have seen. So there we have it. After 3 episodes on sexy pictures, we have done 2 on sexual body parts. Our next 2 episodes will be about the sexy people who appear in art, royal favorites, female and male, and the high-end courtesans like La Traviata or Gigi, who fascinated both artists and their wealthy patrons, from ancient Athens and Edo period Japan to the Paris of the Belle Époque.
Here are the artworks which were part of today's episode.